All right, guys, so this is your lesson screencast for September 22nd, Tuesday. You have three things in your folder to do today or in your ed notebook. We're going to review your notice and note signposts and learn three new ones. So we're going to be looking at those signposts. They're right here. That's assigned to you in Google Classroom. In Ed. Open it with Cami so that it'll be uploaded to your drive and you'll always be able to refer back to it. You also have notice and note in Ed, and so go ahead and have that tab open as well. And then you also have a grammar practice to do that's called subject and predicate. So just going back to our agenda, those things are listed here, okay? So let's go ahead and get started with notice and note. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because we'll be coming back to it several different times during the year, many different times during the year. I just want you to start learning how to use the notice and note strategy. We've already talked about three different ones last 6 weeks, and now we're going to talk about these three and go ahead and go over the others as well. So this is a reading model on this page. All I'm going to ask you to do possibly is take some notes. At first I was confused by why it says do this and then it's already done for you. Guys that are in here, is this already done for you? Scroll down. Yes. So it says mark, so for instance, it says mark the extreme or absolute language used by the author. And I'm like, well, why does it tell them to do that? And then it's already done. So I'm really confused about that, except that it says it's a reading model. And so I think that what it means is it's showing you how to do an activity like this, how you would stop and mark up things using this strategy. So if you look at the agenda, you can see that the reading selection for the week is from Total Eclipse. So that's what they're referring to when they talk about what we're going to read. You will encounter signposts that will give you clues about the ideas and information in this essay. It's an essay. So here are the two key signposts and a big question for you to read, illustrated with examples from the essay. So contrast and contradictions is one of your signposts. Extreme or absolute language is one of your signposts. And a questioning stance is one of your signposts. So we're going to talk about all those. But let's go ahead and everybody in here get your heads up and get clicked over to this. I want us to go through all of the notice and note strategies. So contrast and contradictions, when you're reading and a character says or does something that's opposite and contradicts what he has been saying or doing all along, you should stop and ask yourself, why is the character doing that? It will help you make a prediction or make an inference about the plot. Words of the wiser, do y'all remember that from last 6 weeks? Which character had words of the wiser? It's from the very first story that we read. Aaron? The goldfish, a character who's probably older and wiser and takes the main character aside and gives advice. So remember, the goldfish was giving advice to Sergei. So you ask yourself, what's the life lesson that the author is trying to get across? Again and again, we looked at that one last 6 weeks. Remember, guys, you're going to have to use these tools in your reading this 6 weeks to mark it up. These are some of your annotations that you'll be doing. So when you're reading and notice a word or a phrase, this is the same thing as repetition. You've learned about repetition before. When an author repeats something more than once, it's usually on purpose for a particular reason. So why does this keep showing up again and again? That's what you ask yourself. It can tell you about the theme or the conflict or help foreshadow something. An aha moment. We haven't talked about that one yet. When your character suddenly realizes or understands something. You need to take note of that. All of these are things that will help you understand the text, okay? A memory moment. We went over that one last 6 weeks, right? These are flashbacks. Remember when Sergei was remembering back in Russia about his dad always being scared that he was going to be taken away because he was a Jew and all of that. That was a memory moment. And always, if there's a flashback or a memory with a character, it's significant and important. Tough questions. When you're reading and a character asks himself a really difficult question, you should stop and ask yourself, what does this question make me wonder about? And we're going to be specifically talking about this one today, extreme or absolute language. Absolute language is when someone says something like, this should never happen, it always happens. That's absolute language. When you're reading and you notice the author uses language that leaves no doubt, exaggerates, or pushes to the limit, you should stop and ask yourself, why did the author say it like that? You might realize the author is exaggerating to make you think a certain way. We're going to talk about these today in your other lesson, contrast and contradictions. When you're reading and the author shows you the difference between what you know and what is happening in the text, or a difference between two or more things in the text, you should stop and ask yourself, what is the difference and why does it matter? Word gaps. We're almost through, guys, going through these signposts. When you're reading and the author uses a word or phrase you don't know, you should stop and ask yourself, do I know this word from someplace else? Does this seem like technical talk for experts of this topic? Can I find other clues? So a word gap is just where you get to a point where you don't know a word. If you just skip over it and not understanding what it means, and I've done that a lot of times in my life, and I know you have too. I'm like, I don't really know what that means, but I'm just going to keep going. It can really affect your understanding of the text. So it's best to figure it out or look it up. Numbers and stats. When the author uses this, and this is really important in like sometimes in a persuasive essay, when the author is trying to persuade you, let's say that too much sugar is bad in your diet is bad for you. Then they're going to use specific data and statistics and numbers. That's always important to note. Remember, this is called notice and note. So you notice it and you go, oh, okay, that probably means something. That's probably significant. And then quoted words. If the author quotes somebody, there's significance to that. All right, so there are all of your signposts. I want you to refer back to these in your drive. Let's go ahead and rename this since you've got it open. Let's just rename this notice and note signposts. And then if you are needing to find this, and you will need to find this, guys, because I'll say you need to, in your independent reading today, you need to mark up the text using your notice and note signposts. So you'll need to pull it up. So everybody rename this, and if you can either search by notice and note or signpost to find it. All right, everybody good on that? You with us? Over here in the front corner, are you with me? Okay, just making sure. All right. Let's go back to our actual lesson, and then you're going to get to your grammar lesson for today. So you're going to read this excerpt from Total Eclipse, and then here are the signposts that they want you to look for: contrast and contradictions, extreme or absolute language, and a questioning stance. So imagine trying to catch up with a friend after a big game when everyone in the crowd is wearing your team's color. Luckily, your friend is wearing her psychedelic bandana. I never knew bandana had two ends. Does that look right? I guess it is. So she stands out in the crowd. So everybody's wearing team colors. Everybody's wearing their black and gold. You're trying to find your friend, and she has on like a tie-dye psychedelic bandana. That's a contrast, and therefore it makes her easier to find. When you read, sometimes the most important thing will stand out as well. Authors set up contrast and contradictions to alert the readers to important information. Recognizing contrast and contradictions can help readers identify the main idea, understand the author's purpose, and note cause and effect relationships. When you see phrases like these, see if there is a contrast or a contradiction there. Look at these phrases. Read those for me, Dagan.
On the other hand, however, instead, and you might be surprised.
Okay, can you see how that might introduce a contrast or a contradiction? Especially the on the other hand or however and instead, well, actually all of them. So when you see words like that, you might or probably will have a contrast or a contradiction. Look for a contrast between what you would expect and what the author says. Look for a contrast between two ideas or approaches to the topic. Look for a contradiction about something stated earlier in a text. So now I'm telling you to identify these two, but they've already identified them for you. Identify the two ideas contrasted by the author. This is from the text that we're about to read, by the way, so I'll give you a little preview. Usually it is a bit of a trick to keep your knowledge from blinding you, but during an eclipse, it is easy. What you see is much more convincing than any wild-eyed theory you may know. So what is the effect of this contrast? It emphasizes how the experience of viewing a total eclipse is completely different from what you would expect. Usually it is a bit of a trick to keep your knowledge from blinding you. But during an eclipse, it is easy. This is what you expect, but during an eclipse, what you see is much more convincing than any wild-eyed theory you may know. Extreme or absolute language. Nonfiction authors, we're about to read a piece of nonfiction, meaning it's real to life, share information or real experiences. So when an author seems to exaggerate, it gets your attention. As you read, note examples of extreme language like everyone knows that. That's an exaggeration, isn't it? Does everyone know anything?
No.
Not really. You can always find that one person that goes, oh, I didn't know that. Words like never or always. Have you ever heard the phrase never say never? That's extreme language. So you say something like, I'll never do that. You see somebody doing something, you judge them for it, and you say, I'll never do that. And then a lot of times in life, maybe you come back and do that, and somebody says, oh, I thought you said you would never do that. Words like always. Does anybody ever always do something? I mean, they could, but it's not very likely. Words ending in est, you know, that comparison word is greatest. And we must all agree that. Now, that's not to say you can't use these things. You can in your writing. Actually, it can be very helpful when you're trying to prove a point. We must all agree that so-and-so blank blank is wrong. So let's mark the extreme language that's used here. Here it is. Never. You do not see the moon. You may read that the moon has something to do with eclipses. I have never seen the moon yet. You do not see the moon. Well, that's not actually true. So near the sun, it is as completely invisible as the stars are by day. So you see that completely invisible? That's exaggerated language. Why did the author use this language? The language makes it clear that even though people would expect to see the moon during an eclipse, there is no way that they would. The last item I want to talk about is a questioning stance. Maybe you've had an experience of a friend telling you a story that involves people you don't know. If your friend assumes you know these people, the story might make no sense at all. You might have the same experience reading nonfiction. In one essay, an author may not be able to provide all the background knowledge you might need to understand the topic. When you read nonfiction, ask yourself, what did the author think I already knew? Okay. In education, this is something that teachers talk about a lot, and that is that sometimes, everybody awake? That is that sometimes teachers assume that you know things that you don't already know. Because I've been teaching English for 20 years now, and I went to college for 4 years to be an English teacher. And so I've read certain things, you know. I'm by no means an expert on everything, but there's a lot of stuff that I know. And sometimes I assume that you guys know some things that at your age, you really haven't had no experience with and probably shouldn't really know that. So it's very important to recognize that when you're reading, if the author is assuming that you should know something that you don't know, then maybe you might have to do a little bit of background research to really understand. What does the author think you already know in this little passage? What you see in an eclipse is entirely different from what you know. Well, he's assuming that you know something about an eclipse. It is especially different for those of us whose grasp of astronomy is so frail that, given a flashlight, a grapefruit, 2 oranges, and 15 years, we still could not figure out which way to set the clocks for daylight savings time. Oh, that's an interesting statement. So this guy is obviously some sort of expert on astronomy, but he's saying his expertise is not very good, but he's still assuming that we should know something about it. And I can just about guarantee you that I won't know much about it. So what does the author think you already know? The author thinks that I already know about what happens during an eclipse. And I think I know some of the basics, but I mean basic. How much do you think you know about what happens during and I'm assuming this is a lunar eclipse. So raise your hand. 1 if you know very little, 5 if you think you know it all. Everybody raise your hand. Give me a 1 to 5 with how much you know about lunar eclipses. All right, good. I've got a 5. I've got some 3s, a 2. I think I saw a 1 a minute ago. All right, so it will be interesting to see what the author assumes that we know versus what we do know. So guys, I know that was fast and I mainly just read it to you, but remember, let's just circle back to what we're learning here. The notice and note strategies. These are things that you need to look for when you're reading because it's what all good writers do. Okay, they use all of these things. They use all of these signposts, and that's what the people that came up with these signposts did. They just looked through a bunch of good writing by good authors, and they said, what do all of these things have in common? Well, they have contrast and contradiction. They have words of the wiser. They have repetition. Okay, they have an aha moment, and so forth. So these signposts are things that we're looking for as we read, and we'll come back to these again and again throughout the year. All right, let's go back to Ed and open your, we have about 18 minutes left or so. Open your assignment, your interactive grammar lesson over subject and predicate. Now, in the last activity that we just did, you just listened to me talk. We're not going to do that this time. You're going to do the work. Yes? Yes. Refresh your page because I just assigned it a few minutes ago. It's there because I just saw somebody click on it. All right, so you're going to look for what identifies a complete subject and a complete predicate. So we're just going to look at a couple of examples. I'm not going to read it all to you. You can go back if you want to. The pioneers crossed the desert at night. Here's the complete subject because who is the sentence about? And this is all review, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. It's about the pioneers. That's the subject of the sentence. So the goes with that. And then here's my verb, crossed. So everything with the verb beyond goes with the predicate. Now, is everybody watching? This is a reversed sentence. Long and hard was the journey. Well, I don't think I would write like that, but some people do sometimes. Actually, the subject is at the end of this sentence. So this is the complete subject and this is the complete predicate. And then here, when you ask a question, the subject is usually the second word. Have you or where are, okay? So have you, and this is part of the predicate, read the pioneers' diaries, okay? So you may need to go back and read some of this on your own again, but you're going to complete these and see how it gives you an opportunity to check it. So you can redo it if you need to. So select the words that make up the complete subject of the sentence. What is the subject of this sentence? Grandma. So I clicked that, Now let's go back to this one that was a question. The subject was only one word on that. Did is part of the verb. Own a Cornhusk doll is all part of the predicate. So let's check it and make sure that we got the complete subject. Correct. Number 2, select the words that make up the complete subject of this sentence. How interesting and colorful that book on dolls is. What's the subject? What is this sentence about? The book, but it also is the book about dolls, right? That goes with it. And it's also, this is like saying this book or that book, a book, the book, that goes with it as well. That book on dolls, and this is the predicate, is interesting and colorful. Hope we're right. Hope I'm right. There we go. Okay, so you see how to do that one. Now on this one down here, you're going to identify the complete predicate. A good bike trail simplifies travel. Here's the verb and what comes after the verb. Number 2, select the words that make up the complete predicate in the sentence. And guys, you may think I'm going too fast through this, but this is so much review. I mean, this is literally like 3rd and 4th grade stuff, okay? So if you need extra help on this, you need to go back and read that. Of course, I can help you too. But cool and crisp was the weather. I would take this sentence and turn it around since it's a backwards sentence. The weather was cool and crisp. And then what would the predicate be? Was cool and crisp. All right. You have the rest of the class period to finish that. That's 20 questions. I will be able to see if you did all of them and corrected them. And that's what you will be graded on. Okay, for my remote learners or students in other classes, that's your lesson for the day, and I will talk to you soon.